The music stopped the moment Elena stepped into the circle of torchlight, and every eye in the Crimson Moon Pack turned toward her like she was already something to be judged. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain the wolves closest to her could hear it. Tonight was supposed to be the greatest night of her life. Tonight she was supposed to meet her fated mate in front of the whole pack and become someone who mattered. Instead, she felt the air change before Damon even opened his mouth. He stood at the center of the gathering, tall and broad, his dark eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her. For one heartbeat, something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like recognition, almost like relief. Then his jaw tightened, and the warmth drained out of his expression like water through open fingers. "No," he said, just that one word, flat and cold, and it hit her harder than any blow could have. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stay standing, forced herself to keep her chin level, even as her whole world tilted sideways. Damon, the pack elder beside him, a stern woman named Corinne, placed a hand on his arm. "The bond does not lie. She is your fated mate. You cannot simply refuse what nature has chosen." "I can, and I do." Damon's voice carried across the clearing, sharp enough that even the wind seemed to still. "Look at her. She has no title, no strength, no place among us worth mentioning. I am the future alpha of this pack. I need a mate who can stand beside me as Luna, not someone who trembles at the sound of her own name." Elena's throat closed. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to remind him that strength was not the only thing that mattered, but the words would not come. All she could do was stand there while 300 pairs of eyes watched her be discarded, like something broken and unwanted. "I reject you, Elena," Damon said, and this time his voice dropped low enough that only those nearest could hear the finality in it. "As my fated mate, I reject the bond completely." The pain that tore through her chest was not just emotional, it was physical, a burning ache that spread from her heart outward, as if something inside her had been ripped away and left a hollow space behind. She had heard stories about rejection, about how it felt like losing a limb, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, and stumbled backward. Laughter rose from somewhere in the crowd. Not everyone was laughing, but it only took a few cruel voices to make the humiliation complete. Elena caught sight of a group of younger wolves, whispering behind their hands, their eyes bright with the kind of pleasure that came from watching someone else fall. "She probably knew this would happen," one of them said, not quietly enough. "Look at her. What did she expect?" Elena turned and ran. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed to be anywhere but there, anywhere the torchlight and the whispers and Damon's cold eyes could not follow her. She ran past the long wooden hall where the pack held its feasts, past the training grounds where she had spent years trying to prove she belonged, past the small cottage she shared with her younger brother Colin, and did not stop until the forest swallowed her whole. She collapsed at the base of an old oak tree, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. The bond severing left behind a strange numbness, like a limb gone to sleep, except this numbness reached all the way into her soul. For a long time, she simply sat there, letting the darkness of the forest wrap around her like a blanket. It was easier to be alone with the trees than to imagine going back and facing the pack again. The trees did not judge her. The trees did not care whether she was strong enough or important enough. They simply stood, patient and unbothered, the way she wished she could be. When she finally found the strength to move, the moon had climbed high above the canopy, and a chill had settled into her bones. She made her way back toward the packlands slowly, dreading every step, until she saw Colin waiting for her near the edge of the tree line. Her brother was only 16, still young enough that his shoulders had not yet filled out the way an adult wolf's would, but his eyes held a maturity that made him seem older. When he saw her, he ran forward and pulled her into a tight hug. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "Everyone is talking about it."
"Of course they are."
Elena's voice came out hoarse.
"It is not every day the future alpha humiliates someone in front of the entire pack."
"He is a fool." Colin's voice trembled with anger. "You are worth 10 of him." Elena managed a small, broken smile. "You have to say that. You are my brother. I mean it." He held her at arm's length, studying her face. "Elena, listen to me. This does not define you. Whatever happens next, you are still the same person you were this morning. She wanted to believe him, but the ache in her chest told a different story. The bond might have been severed, but something inside her had changed permanently, and she was not sure it could ever be repaired. They walked back toward the cottage together, but before they reached it, a pair of pack guards intercepted them. Elena recognized both of them, wolves she had grown up alongside, trained beside, laughed with during better days. Now their faces were carefully blank, professional in a way that made her stomach drop. "Elena," the taller guard said, "the council has called for you." "Now?" Colin stepped protectively in front of his sister. "It is the middle of the night." "The Alpha's orders are not something we question," the guard replied, not unkindly, but firmly enough that there was no room for argument. Elena squeezed her brother's hand once, before following the guards toward the great hall. Whatever was coming, she needed to face it alone. Dragging Colin into the middle of her disgrace would only make things worse for both of them. The great hall looked different at night, lit only by a handful of torches that cast long shadows across the stone floor. The pack elders sat in a half-circle at the far end, and Damon stood among them, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Elena forced herself to walk forward, though every instinct screamed at her to turn and run again. "Elena of the Hartley line," Corinne began, her voice formal and distant. "You stand before this council following the rejection of the mate bond by our future Alpha. According to the old laws, a rejected mate whose bond partner holds a position of leadership must be reassigned or removed from packlands to prevent conflict and maintain order." Elena's stomach turned to ice. "Removed? You mean banished?" "The council has voted," another elder said, an older man named Harold whose kindness Elena had always trusted, though tonight his eyes would not meet hers. "By a narrow decision, but a decision nonetheless. You are to leave Crimson Moon lands by sunrise, and are forbidden from returning." "This is not fair," Elena's voice cracked. "I did nothing wrong. I did not choose this. He rejected me, not the other way around." "The law does not concern itself with fairness," Corinne said. "It concerns itself with the stability of the pack. Having a rejected mate remain within our borders, especially one bonded to our future Alpha, creates tension that this pack cannot afford." Elena looked toward Damon, silently pleading with him to say something, to object, to show even a flicker of the conscience she had once believed he possessed. He said nothing. He simply looked away, as though she had already ceased to matter to him the moment the word no left his mouth. "Fine," Elena said, and to her own surprise, her voice came out steady. "I will go. But know this. I never asked to be your mate, Damon. I never asked for any of this. And someday, you may realize that what you threw away tonight was worth more than you understood." She turned and walked out of the hall without waiting for a response, her spine straight despite the trembling in her legs, refusing to let them see her break completely. Colin met her outside, and when she told him what had happened, his face went pale with fury. "They cannot do this. This is our home." "They can, and they have." Elena took a shaking breath. "I need to gather what little I own. I have until sunrise. I am coming with you." "No." Elena gripped his shoulders. "You are still young. You have a place here, a future here. I will not let you throw that away because of me." "Elena." "Please, Colin. Promise me you will stay. Promise me you will finish your training, find your own path. I could not bear it if you lost everything because of what happened to me." Colin's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she was asking even as it broke his heart to agree. "I will find you," he said. "Wherever you end up, I will find you someday." "I know you will." They spent the remaining hours before dawn together, Colin helping her gather a small bag of supplies, a worn blanket, a knife their father had left behind, whatever dried food the cottage could spare. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say that would not make the parting harder. When the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, Elena stood at the edge of the pack borders, looking back one last time at the only home she had ever known. Colin stood beside her, his hand gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt. "I will find you," he repeated, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered back. "Take care of yourself." She pulled him into one final embrace, memorizing the feeling of her brother's arms around her, knowing it might be a very long time before she felt that comfort again. Then, before her resolve could crumble entirely, she turned and walked into the unknown, leaving behind everything she had ever known, carrying nothing but a small bag and a heart that ached with a wound she was not sure would ever fully heal. The forest beyond the pack borders was unfamiliar territory, wild and untamed, filled with dangers she had only heard about in stories told around the fire. Rogue wolves, who answered to no pack and no law. Territories controlled by alphas who did not welcome strangers. Elena had spent her whole life within the safety of Crimson Moon's borders, and now, for the first time, she was completely alone, in a world that owed her nothing. She walked for hours, her legs aching, her stomach twisting with a hunger she tried to ignore. The morning sun rose higher, filtering through the canopy in scattered beams of light, but the beauty of the forest offered little comfort against the storm raging inside her. By midday, exhaustion began to weigh on her more heavily than she expected. The sleepless night, the emotional devastation, the physical strain of walking without rest, all of it combined into a weariness that made her limbs feel like they were made of stone. She found a small stream and knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands and drinking deeply, grateful for even this small mercy. As she rested by the water, she caught her reflection staring back at her, and for a moment she barely recognized the woman looking up from the rippling surface. Her eyes, usually bright with determination, looked hollow and tired. Dirt smudged her cheek where she had wiped away tears without realizing it. She looked, she thought bitterly, exactly like what everyone had decided she was. Broken. No, she said aloud, startling herself with the sound of her own voice in the quiet forest. I refuse to be broken. It was a small act of defiance, spoken to no one but the trees and the water, but it steadied something inside her. She thought of Colin's words, that this did not define her, and she clung to them like a lifeline. Whatever happened next, whatever trials waited for her beyond these woods, she would not let Damon's rejection be the story of her life. It would be a chapter, perhaps a painful one, but not the ending. She rose to her feet, adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, and continued walking, not entirely certain where she was headed, only certain that she needed to keep moving forward. Behind her lay a home that no longer wanted her. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and a world she knew nothing about. But for the first time since the previous night, a small, stubborn spark of hope flickered to life inside her chest, refusing to be extinguished, no matter how hard the darkness pressed against it. She did not know it yet, but that single step forward, taken with a bruised heart and a determined spirit, was the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead her somewhere she never could have imagined. Somewhere far grander and far more dangerous than the small world of Crimson Moon Pack. Somewhere a king waited, though neither of them knew it yet, for the moment their paths would finally cross. The sun began its slow descent by the time Elena reached the edge of a ravine she had never seen before, a jagged scar in the earth that marked, according to old pack stories, the beginning of neutral territory. Beyond this point, no single pack held claim, which meant both greater freedom and far greater danger. Wolves who lived outside the boundaries of established packs answered to no laws but their own, and Elena had heard enough stories to know that not all of them were kind. She hesitated at the edge, glancing back one final time toward the direction she had come from. Somewhere behind her, Colin was probably lying awake, staring at the ceiling of the cottage they used to share, wondering if she was safe. She hoped he was not blaming himself. None of this was his fault, just as none of it had truly been hers. With a steadying breath, she stepped across the ravine's narrow crossing and continued into the unknown. The land on the other side felt different immediately, wilder somehow, the trees older and more tangled, the air carrying scents she did not recognize. She kept her senses alert, ears straining for any sound that might indicate danger. But for the first few hours, she encountered nothing but birdsong and the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. As night began to fall again, exhaustion returned with a vengeance. Elena found a hollow beneath the roots of a fallen tree and curled herself into it, using her blanket for what little warmth it could provide. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and even when exhaustion finally pulled her under, her dreams were filled with Damon's cold eyes and the sound of laughter following her into the dark. She woke before dawn, stiff and cold, her body protesting every movement as she crawled out from her makeshift shelter. 2 days had passed since the rejection, but it felt like a lifetime. She ate the last of her dried food, knowing she would need to find more soon, and continued walking, driven by nothing but the stubborn refusal to give up. It was on the third day that everything changed. She had been following a narrow game trail through dense forest, hoping it might lead to a stream, or perhaps a settlement where she could find food, when the scent hit her. Wolf, but not familiar. Multiple wolves, moving fast, moving with purpose. Elena froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, but before she could react, 3 shapes burst from the tree line ahead of her. Rogue wolves! She recognized the wildness in their eyes immediately, the lack of pack discipline in their movements. These were wolves who had chosen, or been forced into, a life outside any pack's protection, and the reputation that came with that choice was rarely a peaceful one. "Well, look what wandered into our territory," the largest of the 3 said, circling her slowly. His voice carried a rough edge, amusement mixed with something far more dangerous. A lost little wolf, all alone. "I am just passing through," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "I do not want any trouble." "Trouble found you anyway," the second wolf grinned, showing teeth. Pack scent all over her, but faded. "Rejected, maybe? Banished?" Elena said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. The third wolf laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the trees. "But even better," he said. "No pack to come looking for her. No one to notice if she disappears." Elena's blood ran cold. She took a step backward, calculating her options, but the wolves had already begun closing the distance, cutting off any easy path of retreat. She had trained in her youth, learned to defend herself the way every young wolf did, but 3 against 1, especially against wolves who had clearly spent years surviving in dangerous territory, were odds that terrified her. "I would suggest you let me pass," she said, trying one last time to defuse the situation, though she could hear the tremor in her own voice. The largest wolf only smiled wider. "I would suggest you stop talking." He lunged. Elena reacted on instinct, twisting away from his grasp and shifting mid-motion, her human form dissolving into the sleek gray shape of her wolf as she darted between 2 trees. The transformation, at least, gave her speed, and she used it, weaving through the dense undergrowth as the 3 rogues gave chase behind her. She ran harder than she had ever run in her life, branches tearing at her fur, her lungs burning with effort, but the rogues were fast, faster than she expected, and she could hear them gaining ground behind her. A sharp pain lanced across her flank as one of them caught up enough to strike, and she stumbled, rolling across the forest floor, before scrambling back to her feet and continuing to run. The forest blurred around her, trees and shadows merging into a chaotic streak as pure survival instinct took over. She had no plan beyond simply putting distance between herself and her pursuers, no thought beyond the desperate need to survive. She did not know how long she ran, only that eventually, the sounds of pursuit began to fade behind her, the rogues either losing her trail or abandoning the chase, for reasons she did not understand and did not question. When she finally stopped, collapsing against the base of a large boulder, her body shook with exhaustion and pain. The wound on her flank throbbed, and when she shifted back to her human form, she found blood soaking through her torn clothing. Her vision swam, the adrenaline that had carried her this far finally beginning to fade, leaving raw exhaustion and pain in its place. She needed to keep moving. Staying in one place, injured and vulnerable, was a death sentence if the rogues picked up her trail again. But her body refused to cooperate, every limb heavy as lead, her thoughts growing foggy at the edges. She forced herself upright, gritting her teeth against the pain, and stumbled forward on legs that barely held her weight. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to keep moving, had to survive, had to find some way through this nightmare that her life had become, in the span of just a few short days. The trees around her began to thin as she pushed onward, the terrain shifting into something unfamiliar, more open, more structured, as though she had wandered into land that bore the signs of civilization rather than pure wilderness. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a distant thought registered that this might be dangerous, that unfamiliar territory could belong to another pack entirely, one that might not welcome an injured, trespassing stranger. But her body had reached its limit. Her vision blurred further, darkness creeping in from the edges, and the last thing she registered before her legs finally gave out beneath her was the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and deliberate, and a voice calling out something she could not quite understand, before the world went completely black. She did not know, as consciousness slipped away entirely, that she had collapsed at the very edge of the most powerful territory in the entire region, land ruled not by an ordinary alpha, but by a king whose authority stretched across dozens of packs. She did not know that the footsteps approaching her belonged to a royal guard, trained to report any trespasser directly to the throne. She did not know that this moment, this desperate, painful collapse at the end of her strength, was about to become the turning point of her entire existence. All she knew, in those final fading seconds, was darkness, and the faint, strange comfort of finally being able to stop running. Consciousness returned slowly, in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror trying to reassemble themselves. Elena became aware first of warmth, a soft surface beneath her, the faint scent of herbs, and something clean, almost sweet, that she did not recognize. Her body ached everywhere, a deep, bone-tired soreness that spoke of injuries being tended, rather than left to worsen. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim light of an unfamiliar room. Stone walls rose around her, smooth and carefully constructed, nothing like the wooden cottages of Crimson Moonlands. A large window let in soft afternoon light, and heavy curtains the color of deep burgundy hung on either side. The bed beneath her was the softest thing she had ever felt, layered with blankets that smelled faintly of lavender. For a long moment, panic gripped her. She did not know where she was, did not remember how she had gotten here, and the last clear memory she held was of running through the forest, wounded and desperate, before darkness swallowed everything. The door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, carrying a tray with what looked like water and bandages. She startled slightly upon seeing Elena awake, then offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "You are awake," the woman said, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "That is good. We were beginning to worry." "Where am I?" Elena's voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "You are within the royal stronghold," the woman replied, moving closer to check the bandage wrapped around Elena's side. "My name is Marissa. I am one of the healers here. You were found near the border 3 days ago, badly injured. The guards brought you in, and the king ordered that you be cared for."
3 days?
Elena struggled to sit up, wincing as pain flared along her side. "I have been unconscious for 3 days. You lost a great deal of blood, and your body needed rest to heal properly." Marissa gently pressed her back down against the pillows. "You are safe now. No one here means you harm." Elena's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. The rogue wolves, the chase, the pain in her side, and then, footsteps, a voice calling out, and nothing but darkness. "The royal stronghold," she repeated slowly. "You mean this is the territory of the Alpha King?" "Yes." Marissa's expression grew slightly more careful, as though gauging Elena's reaction. "King Cade Ashreaver rules over this land, and many packs beyond it answer to his authority. You collapsed at the very edge of his territory. It is fortunate his guards found you when they did, or your injuries might have proven fatal." Elena did not know how to feel about this information. She had heard of the Alpha King before, distant stories told with a mixture of awe and fear, tales of a ruler whose power exceeded anything Crimson Moon Pack could claim, whose territory stretched wide enough to encompass dozens of smaller packs beneath his authority. She had never imagined she would find herself within his walls, injured and dependent on the mercy of a king she knew nothing about. "Why would he help someone like me?" Elena asked quietly. "A stranger, trespassing on his lands?" Marissa's expression grew thoughtful. "The king does not often explain his decisions to us, but I will say this. It is unusual for him to intervene personally in matters concerning strangers found at the border. Typically, such matters are handled entirely by the guards. But when you were brought in, he came to see you himself, and he gave direct orders that you receive the finest care available." Elena absorbed this information with a growing sense of unease mixed with confusion. Why would a king, ruler of vast lands and countless packs, take personal interest in an injured stranger with no name, no title, and no connections worth mentioning? It made no sense, and the uncertainty of it left her more anxious than grateful. "I do not understand," she admitted. "Perhaps you will have the chance to ask him yourself." Marissa finished checking the bandages and straightened, offering Elena a cup of water. "Rest now." Your body still needs time to heal fully. I imagine the king will wish to speak with you once you are stronger. Elena drank the water gratefully, her throat parched, and allowed exhaustion to pull her back toward sleep, though this time her dreams were quieter, less haunted by chasing shadows and cold rejection. When she woke again, evening had fallen, and a different attendant brought her a simple meal of broth and bread, which she ate slowly, savoring the warmth after days without proper food. Over the following days, Elena's strength gradually returned. The wound on her side, though it had been deep, healed with the accelerated pace common to wolves of her kind, aided further by whatever skilled care the royal healers provided. She learned that the stronghold was far larger than anything she had ever seen. A sprawling complex of stone buildings, training grounds, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. She learned that hundreds of wolves called this place home, serving the king in various capacities, from guards to healers to advisors. She did not learn much about the king himself, however, beyond fragments of information that Marissa or other attendants let slip during her care. That he was young for a ruler of his standing, having taken the throne after his father's passing several years prior. That he was known for being fair but firm, respected among the packs beneath his authority, though few claimed to know him personally beyond his public role. That he had never taken a Luna, despite considerable pressure from advisors and neighboring packs eager to forge alliances through marriage. Elena found herself curious about this mysterious king who had, for reasons she still did not understand, chosen to save the life of a stranger with nothing to offer him in return. But curiosity was tempered by caution. She had learned, painfully, what happened when she trusted too easily, when she hoped for kindness, only to be met with cruelty instead. She resolved to remain guarded, grateful for the care she had received, but careful not to expect anything more. On the 5th day of her recovery, strong enough now to sit up without pain and walk short distances around her room, Elena received word that the king wished to see her that evening. The announcement sent a wave of nervous energy through her chest, and she spent the hours leading up to the meeting pacing the length of her room, rehearsing what she might say, wondering what he might want from her. Marissa helped her dress in simple but well-made clothing, far finer than anything Elena had owned before, and guided her through the winding stone corridors of the stronghold toward what she called the private meeting chamber, a smaller, more personal space than the grand throne room Elena had glimpsed briefly during her limited wandering. The chamber, when they arrived, was warm and softly lit, a fire crackling in a stone hearth despite the mild evening air. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on subjects Elena could not begin to guess at, and a large window looked out over what appeared to be private gardens, moonlight beginning to touch the tops of carefully tended trees. A man stood near the window, his back to the door, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed simply despite his obvious status. When he turned to face her, Elena's breath caught unexpectedly in her throat. He was younger than she had imagined, though the weight of authority in his posture made him seem older than his years might suggest. Dark hair, cut short and practical, framed a face that held sharp, deliberate features, strong jaw, straight nose, eyes so deeply brown they seemed almost black in the firelight. But it was not simply his appearance that struck her. It was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that felt oddly familiar, though she could not place why. "You must be Elena," he said, his voice deep and measured, carrying an authority that filled the room without needing to be raised. "Yes," she dipped into a small, uncertain bow, unsure of the proper etiquette for addressing a king. "Thank you for your hospitality, and for the care your healers have shown me. I am deeply grateful. There is no need for such formality here." He gestured toward a pair of chairs near the fire. "Please, sit. You are still recovering, and I would rather you be comfortable than correct." Elena hesitated only briefly before accepting the offered seat, watching as he settled into the chair across from her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Up close, she noticed the faint scars along his hands, marks of battles fought and survived, and something about the sight of them made him seem less like an untouchable ruler, and more like a person who had known his own share of hardship. "I imagine you have questions," he said, "about why I chose to intervene on your behalf." "I do," Elena admitted. "I am a stranger, Your Majesty. I have nothing to offer you. No alliance, no title. Nothing that would explain why a king would take personal interest in my survival." Something flickered across his expression, too quick for her to fully interpret. Perhaps I simply believe that no one deserves to be left to die at my borders, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception, but found none. That is a kind sentiment, but kings are rarely so generous without reason. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. You are perceptive. Very well. I will admit there was more to my decision than simple kindness, though the kindness was genuine as well. What reason, then? He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her, with an intensity that made her feel strangely exposed, as though he could see far more than her physical appearance, as though he were searching for something beneath the surface. When my guards brought you to me, unconscious and injured, I felt something I did not expect. A pull, difficult to explain, difficult to ignore. I have felt nothing like it before, and I confess it unsettled me enough that I could not simply hand your care over to others and forget about it. Elena's pulse quickened, an unwelcome flutter of hope rising in her chest, despite her best efforts to remain guarded. She knew what that description sounded like, had heard others describe the pull of the fated bond in similar terms, but she refused to let herself hope for something so impossible. Fate had already chosen cruelly once. She would not allow herself to believe it might offer a second chance. I do not know what that means, she said carefully, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. Neither do I, entirely. Cade's gaze did not waver, but I intend to find out. The weight of his words settled over the room, and Elena found herself unable to look away from his steady, searching eyes, caught between fear and a fragile, unfamiliar hope she was not yet ready to name. Elena did not sleep well that night. Cade's words echoed through her mind, long after Marissa had escorted her back to her chamber, replaying themselves over and over, until she could recite them from memory. A pull, difficult to explain, difficult to ignore. She turned the phrase over in her thoughts like a stone worn smooth by a river, examining it from every angle, searching for some explanation that did not require her to believe in something as fragile and dangerous as hope. She had been rejected once already. She knew, with painful clarity, how quickly a bond could be severed, how easily someone in power could decide she was not worth keeping. She would not let herself fall into the same trap twice, not even for a king who spoke with such quiet sincerity, not even when something in his eyes had made her chest ache with a longing she did not fully understand. Over the following days, Elena continued her recovery, her body growing stronger with each passing hour, though her mind remained a tangled knot of uncertainty. She spent her mornings walking through the private gardens Marissa had shown her, learning the names of unfamiliar flowers, watching birds she had never seen before flit between carefully trimmed hedges. The gardens offered a quiet peace that helped settle her thoughts, even if they could not fully resolve them. It was during one such morning walk that she encountered Cade again, unexpectedly, as he emerged from a side path with a hawk perched on his forearm, its sharp eyes scanning the surrounding trees. He paused when he saw her, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching comfortably rather than awkwardly between them. You have found my favorite part of the grounds, he said eventually, nodding toward the garden around them. It is beautiful, Elena admitted. I did not expect a king's territory to hold something so peaceful. Power does not require constant noise and chaos. He approached slowly, the hawk shifting on his arm, but remaining calm despite Elena's presence. Sometimes the strongest rulers are the ones who understand the value of stillness. Elena studied the hawk curiously. Is she yours? His, actually. His name is Talon. He has been with me since I was a boy, trained by my father, before I inherited both the throne and the responsibility of caring for him. Cade's expression softened slightly as he glanced at the bird. He is one of the few creatures who has known me longer than my current advisors, and certainly one of the few who has never once tried to manipulate me for personal gain. There was a dry humor in his tone that surprised her, a hint of something almost self-deprecating beneath the authority he carried so naturally. That sounds like a lonely way to describe the people around you, Elena said before she could stop herself. Cade's dark eyes met hers, something unreadable passing behind them. Ruling a kingdom this size rarely allows for genuine friendship. Most who surround me want something, whether it is favor, alliance, or influence. It becomes difficult, after enough time, to to trust that anyone sees you, rather than simply what you can offer them. Elena thought of Damon's cold rejection, of the pack that had cast her aside without a second thought, and found an unexpected kinship in Cade's words. "I understand that feeling more than you might realize," she said quietly. "I imagine you do." His gaze held hers for a long moment, something gentle and understanding in his expression. "Would you walk with me? I would like to hear your story, if you are willing to share it." Elena hesitated, old wounds still raw beneath the surface, but something about the quiet sincerity in his request made her want to trust him, at least a little. She nodded, and they began walking together through the winding garden paths, Talon still perched contentedly on Cade's arm. She told him everything, haltingly at first, then with growing openness, as his patient silence encouraged her to continue. She told him about Crimson Moon Pack, about growing up without much status or recognition, about the ceremony where she had expected to finally find her place in the world, only to have it torn away in front of everyone she knew. She told him about Damon's rejection, about the humiliation of the crowd's laughter, about the council's decision to banish her, about leaving Colin behind, with nothing but a promise that they would find each other again. Cade listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively darker as her story unfolded, though his anger, she noticed, seemed directed entirely at the injustice of what had happened to her, rather than at her for sharing it. "He rejected you in front of the entire pack," Cade said finally, his voice low and controlled, though the tension in his jaw suggested restrained fury, "and then banished you for a decision that was entirely his own. The council said it was necessary, to avoid conflict. The council made a coward's decision to protect an unworthy alpha rather than defend an innocent woman who had done nothing to deserve such treatment." Cade's voice carried an edge sharp enough to make Elena flinch slightly, though she understood the anger was not aimed at her. "Forgive me. I do not mean to frighten you. It simply angers me to hear how carelessly you were treated." "It is strange," Elena admitted, "hearing someone defend me so fiercely. I had grown used to being seen as something less than worthy." "You were never less than worthy." Cade stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his dark eyes intense with a conviction that seemed to reach straight into her chest. "Anyone who could not see your strength, your resilience, was simply too blind or too foolish to recognize what stood in front of them." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, unfamiliar and unexpected, and she looked away, unsure how to respond to words so different from anything she had heard in longer than she could remember. "You barely know me," she said softly. "I know enough." Cade's voice gentled. "I know that you survived a rejection that would have broken many others. I know that you walked through unfamiliar, dangerous territory, alone rather than surrender to despair. I know that even now, after everything you have endured, you still speak with dignity rather than bitterness. That tells me more about your character than any title or rank ever could." They continued walking in comfortable silence after that, and Elena found herself, for the first time since the night of her rejection, feeling something other than grief and fear. It was small, fragile, barely more than a flicker, but it was there nonetheless, a warmth she had not expected to feel again so soon. Over the following weeks, their walks became a regular occurrence, evolving naturally into longer conversations that stretched from morning into afternoon. Elena learned about Cade's own history, the weight of responsibility placed on his shoulders after his father's unexpected passing, the loneliness that came with ruling over dozens of packs while trying to maintain fairness and order among wolves who did not always agree with his decisions. She learned about the political pressures he faced constantly, advisors pushing him toward strategic marriages that would strengthen alliances, neighboring packs testing his authority whenever they sensed weakness. In turn, Cade learned about Elena's quiet strength, her dry sense of humor that emerged more freely as trust between them grew, her fierce love for her younger brother, her stubborn refusal to let bitterness consume her despite everything she had endured. He learned that she had a talent for healing, gentle hands that seemed to know instinctively how to ease pain, and he began arranging for her to spend time in the healing chambers alongside Marissa, learning skills that gave her purpose beyond simply recovering from her injuries. It was during one such afternoon, weeks into her stay at the stronghold, that Elena noticed something shifting inside her chest whenever Cade entered a room, a warmth that spread through her whenever he smiled, a comfort she found in his presence, that she had not felt with anyone since losing Colin. She recognized the feeling for what it was, even as she tried desperately to deny it, terrified of what it might mean, terrified of hoping for something she had already lost once before. She found Marissa in the healing chambers one evening, sorting through jars of herbs, and hesitated in the doorway before finally working up the courage to speak. "Marissa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." The healer set down the jar she had been holding, giving Elena her full attention. "When Cade mentioned feeling a pull toward me, when he first found me injured, what did he mean by that?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I do not want to assume something that is not true." Marissa's expression softened with understanding. "It sounds very much like the beginning of a fated bond, though I could not say for certain without more information. Sometimes bonds present themselves gradually, rather than instantly, especially if something has interfered with the natural connection." "Interfered how?" "There are old magics, rare and not often discussed, that can conceal a fated bond temporarily, sometimes for reasons tied to fate itself, ensuring two people meet under the right circumstances, rather than before they are ready." Marissa studied Elena carefully. "It is only a theory, but given what I have observed between you and the king, I would not be surprised if something similar occurred here." Elena's heart raced at the implication, hope and fear tangling together into something almost unbearable. "But I already have a mate. Had one." "Damon rejected the bond, but does that not mean the connection is severed permanently?" "A rejected bond severs the connection between the two people involved, yes." Marissa's expression grew thoughtful. "But it does not prevent fate from recognizing a different, truer match afterward. Some believe that a false bond, one not meant to last, can sometimes mask the presence of the real one, especially if unusual circumstances or ancient magic are involved." Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what Marissa was suggesting. Could it be possible that Damon had never truly been her fated mate at all? That some strange twist of fate or old magic had concealed her true bond, until circumstances forced it into the open? The idea felt too large, too impossible to fully accept, and yet something in her chest, that same warmth that grew stronger every time she thought of Cade, whispered that it might be true. She left the healing chambers that evening with her mind spinning, uncertain what to believe, uncertain what to hope for, but unable to deny that everything happening around her felt too significant, too deliberate, to simply be coincidence. Whatever force had guided her through the forest, through injury and despair, straight to the borders of a king's territory, it felt increasingly like something greater than chance had been at work all along. As the weeks continued to pass, Elena's connection with Cade deepened further. Each conversation, each shared silence, each quiet moment in the gardens weaving them closer together, in ways neither of them fully addressed aloud. She began noticing details about him she had not registered before. The way his expression softened almost imperceptibly whenever she laughed, the way he seemed to seek her out during quiet moments in his busy schedule, the way his dark eyes lingered on her a beat longer than necessary whenever their gazes met. She told herself repeatedly that she was imagining things, that hope was dangerous, that trusting too quickly had already cost her dearly once before. But despite every warning she gave herself, the connection between them continued to grow, undeniable and increasingly impossible to ignore, until the day everything Marissa had theorized would finally be confirmed, beyond any doubt. The confirmation came on an ordinary afternoon, one that began no differently than any other day Elena had spent within the stronghold walls. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life there, waking with the sunrise, spending mornings assisting Marissa in the healing chambers, and afternoons walking the gardens, or sharing quiet meals with Cade whenever his duties allowed. That particular day, Cade had asked her to join him in the training grounds, curious to see the fighting skills she had mentioned learning during her years in Crimson Moonpack. Elena agreed, though nervousness fluttered in her stomach at the thought of demonstrating anything in front of him, uncertain whether her modest abilities would seem impressive or embarrassing compared to the warriors who typically trained within these walls. The training grounds stretched wide and open, surrounded by low stone walls, with several wolves already sparring in pairs across the packed dirt. Cade led her toward a quieter corner, away from the main activity, and gestured for her to demonstrate whatever techniques she felt comfortable sharing. She moved through a series of basic forms, footwork and strikes she had practiced countless times growing up, her body remembering the motions even as nervousness made her movements slightly stiffer than usual. Cade watched with quiet attention, offering no comment until she finished, breathing slightly heavier from the exertion. "You have good instincts," he said finally. "Untrained in some areas, but the foundation is solid. Would you allow me to show you something?" Elena nodded, curious despite her lingering nerves, and Cade stepped closer, positioning himself beside her, rather than across from her, adjusting the angle of her stance with careful, deliberate movements. When his hand brushed against her arm to correct her positioning, something happened that neither of them expected. A jolt of warmth shot through Elena's entire body, starting from the point of contact and spreading outward like wildfire, so intense it stole the breath from her lungs. She gasped, stumbling slightly, and Cade's hand instinctively caught her waist to steady her, the contact only intensifying the sensation until it felt like every nerve in her body had suddenly come alive. Cade froze completely, his dark eyes widening with shock, as the same sensation clearly overtook him. For a long moment, neither of them moved, caught in the overwhelming rush of a connection so powerful it left them both breathless, staring at each other with dawning understanding. "You feel that?" Cade said, his voice rough with barely contained emotion. "Yes," Elena whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "What is happening?" "I believe," Cade said slowly, carefully, as though testing words he could barely allow himself to believe, "that this is the true bond, finally revealing itself." Elena's mind reeled, memories of her conversation with Marissa flooding back, the theory of a concealed bond, of fate choosing to hide the truth until circumstances aligned properly. She had wanted to believe it, had hoped for it in the quiet corners of her heart she refused to fully acknowledge, but experiencing the reality of it now, feeling the undeniable pull that connected her to this man standing before her, overwhelmed every careful wall she had built to protect herself. "But I already had a mate," she said, though her voice carried more confusion than conviction now. "Damon. The bond was real. I felt the pain of the rejection. Perhaps that bond was real in its own way, but incomplete, or perhaps circumstances beyond our understanding shaped what happened between you." Cade's hand remained gently at her waist, neither of them making any move to step away from the contact that felt, impossibly, like coming home. "Whatever the explanation, I know what I feel right now, standing here with you, is unlike anything I have experienced before. This is not something I can dismiss or ignore." Elena searched his eyes, looking for any trace of doubt or hesitation, but found only steady, unwavering certainty. "I am frightened," she admitted quietly. "The last time I trusted a bond like this, it destroyed me." "I understand your fear," Cade said, his voice gentle but firm. "I will not pretend the pain you experienced does not matter, or that trust should come easily after what you endured. But I promise you this, whatever happens between us, I will not treat this connection carelessly. You deserve far better than what you were given before, and I intend to prove that, however long it takes." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. A mixture of lingering fear and fragile, desperate hope, finally allowed to surface after weeks of careful suppression. Cade reached up, gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek, his touch impossibly tender for someone who commanded such vast authority. "I do not know how to trust this," Elena whispered. "I do not know how to trust anything, not after everything that happened." "Then we will take this slowly," Cade said. "There is no need to rush into anything you are not ready for. I only ask that you allow yourself the possibility, the chance to see where this connection might lead, without the weight of fear deciding everything in advance." Elena nodded slowly, unable to fully articulate the swirl of emotions rushing through her, but recognizing the sincerity in his words, the patience he offered, despite what must have been his own overwhelming reaction to discovering their bond. They stood together in the training grounds a while longer, neither speaking, simply allowing themselves to exist within the quiet significance of the moment, the world around them continuing on, oblivious to the profound shift that had just occurred between them. News of the bond, however, did not remain contained for long. Within days, whispers began spreading through the stronghold, servants and guards speculating about the unusual closeness between their king and the mysterious woman who had arrived injured and unknown weeks prior. Elena noticed the shift in how others treated her, some with curious respect, others with wary uncertainty. unsure how to categorize someone who might soon hold significant influence over their king. Cade, for his part, made no effort to hide the developing bond, choosing instead to be openly protective and attentive toward Elena whenever they were together in public settings. He introduced her formally to key members of his court, insisted she join him for important meals rather than eating separately, and made clear through both word and action that her presence within the stronghold was no longer simply a matter of temporary hospitality. Not everyone welcomed this shift with grace. Elena first noticed the tension during a formal dinner several weeks after the bond's revelation, when she was seated beside Cade at the head table for the first time. Whispered conversations died as she entered the hall, replaced by careful, calculating glances from several of the advisors and nobles gathered for the occasion. She recognized the type of scrutiny immediately, having experienced something similar, though far crueler, during her time in Crimson Moon Pack. "They do not approve," she murmured quietly to Cade as they took their seats. "Some do not," he admitted, his voice equally low, meant only for her ears. Change unsettles people who have grown comfortable with the way things have always been. Give them time. But time, Elena would soon learn, did little to soften the resistance building among certain factions of Cade's court. One advisor in particular, a sharp-featured man named Edwin who served as Cade's primary political counsel, made his disapproval known through carefully worded suggestions and pointed questions during official meetings, always framed as concern for the kingdom's stability, rather than outright objection. "Your Majesty," Edwin said during one such meeting, which Elena had been invited to observe, "surely you understand the political implications of pursuing a relationship with someone possessing no title, no pack alliance, no strategic value. The neighboring territories have long anticipated a marriage that would strengthen our borders and secure lasting peace among the packs." "I am aware of the political landscape, Edwin," Cade replied evenly, though Elena could sense the tension beneath his controlled tone. "But I will not sacrifice a genuine bond for the sake of political convenience. My father taught me that true strength comes from authenticity, not from carefully calculated alliances built on nothing but strategic necessity." "With respect, Your Majesty, your father also understood the delicate balance required to maintain peace among dozens of packs, some of whom would seize any perceived weakness as an opportunity to challenge your authority." Elena felt the weight of the room's attention shift toward her, calculating gazes assessing her worth, or lack thereof, in the grand scheme of political strategy. She kept her expression carefully neutral, refusing to let the old familiar sting of feeling unworthy take root again, though it required considerable effort. "Weakness," Cade said, his voice carrying a sharp edge now, "is not found in choosing genuine connection over calculated advantage. Weakness would be allowing fear of political consequence to dictate every decision I make, including matters as personal as who I choose to stand beside as my equal." The meeting ended shortly after, tension lingering thick in the air despite Cade's firm dismissal of Edwin's concerns. Elena found herself troubled long after they left the chamber, not by doubt in Cade's commitment, but by growing awareness of just how much resistance their bond might face as it continued to develop. "You should not have to defend our connection to your own advisors," she said later that evening, as they walked together through the quiet gardens, moonlight casting soft shadows across the carefully tended paths. "I do not mind defending something worth defending," Cade replied, taking her hand gently in his. "But I understand your concern. This will not be easy, Elena. There will be more resistance before this is finished. More challenges from those who believe political strategy should outweigh genuine connection. I will not pretend otherwise." "Are you certain this is worth the conflict it will cause?" Elena asked quietly, old insecurities creeping back despite her best efforts to suppress them. "I do not wish to become a source of division within your kingdom." Cade stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression fierce with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "You are not a source of division, Elena. You are the truest thing that has happened to me since I took this throne. Anyone who cannot see your worth, who values political convenience over genuine connection, does not understand what actually strengthens a kingdom in the long term." His words settled something turbulent within her chest, though the underlying fear did not fully disappear. She recognized, with growing clarity, that the path ahead would not be simple or without significant challenges. But standing there in the moonlit garden, Cade's hand warm and steady in her own, She found herself willing, for the first time since her rejection, to face whatever difficulties lay ahead, rather than retreat into the safety of expecting the worst. Autumn began settling over the kingdom. As the weeks passed, the gardens shifting from summer green to warm shades of amber and gold, and Elena found herself, almost without noticing the transition, no longer thinking of the stronghold as a temporary refuge, but as something closer to a home. The rooms she had once wandered with cautious uncertainty now felt familiar beneath her feet. The healers in the infirmary greeted her by name each morning. Several of the guards had grown accustomed to nodding respectfully as she passed, and even the kitchen staff had learned which meals she preferred, without needing to be told twice. Yet despite the growing comfort of her surroundings, Elena remained acutely aware that comfort could be fleeting, that homes could be taken away in the span of a single cruel sentence. The memory of Crimson Moonpack, of Damon's rejection echoing across a torchlit clearing, never fully left her, lingering at the edges of her thoughts, even during her happiest moments with Cade. She had learned, painfully, not to trust stability too completely, and though she tried to release that old fear, it clung stubbornly to her heart, like a shadow that refused to fade in daylight. It was during one quiet morning, as she helped Marissa organize newly delivered herbs in the infirmary, that a commotion near the front gates drew her attention. Raised voices carried across the courtyard, sharp with urgency, and Elena set down the jars she had been sorting to peer through the open window. A young man stood at the gate, disheveled and clearly exhausted, arguing with two guards who seemed reluctant to let him pass. Something about his posture, the stubborn set of his shoulders, the familiar cadence of his voice even from this distance, sent a jolt of recognition through Elena's chest. "Colin," she breathed, disbelief and joy, colliding so suddenly that she nearly knocked over the jar in her hands. She did not wait for permission or explanation. She ran from the infirmary, through the winding stone corridors, out into the courtyard, ignoring the startled glances of servants and guards alike as she sprinted toward the gate. When Colin caught sight of her, his exhausted expression transformed instantly into pure relief, and he pushed past the guards, meeting her halfway across the courtyard as she flung herself into his arms. "You found me," Elena said, tears streaming freely down her face, as she held her brother tightly, still barely believing he was truly standing before her. "I told you I would." Colin's voice cracked with emotion as he returned her embrace fiercely. "It took weeks of searching, following rumors and half-truths, but I never stopped looking." The guards, recognizing the clear bond between them, and likely alerted by now to the situation, through word already spreading through the stronghold, allowed the reunion to continue, without further interference. Elena finally pulled back enough to study her brother's face, noting how much older he looked than the 16-year-old boy she had left behind months before, exhaustion and worry having etched lines into a face that should have still held youthful softness. "How did you find this place?" she asked. "It has been so long. I worried something might have happened to you." "I left Crimson Moon shortly after you did," Colin admitted. "I could not stay there, not after what they did to you. I followed whatever trail I could find, asked questions in every settlement I passed through, until eventually the stories led me here, to the territory of the Alpha King. I heard rumors of a woman matching your description, who had been taken in by the royal stronghold, and I could not rest until I confirmed it was true." Elena's heart ached at the thought of her brother traveling alone for months, facing the same dangers she herself had encountered, driven only by determination to find her again. "You should not have taken such risks," she said, though gratitude far outweighed any scolding in her tone. "You are my sister, there was no other choice to make." Colin's gaze shifted past her, taking in the grandeur of the stronghold surrounding them, clearly processing the significance of where he now stood. "Elena, what happened? Why are you here, in the territory of the Alpha King himself?" Before she could begin to explain, footsteps approached from behind her, and she turned to find Cade crossing the courtyard, his expression carefully composed, though Elena could read the concern beneath his controlled demeanor. He had likely been alerted the moment the commotion began, and his presence now, standing protectively near her, spoke volumes about how seriously he took any potential threat to her safety. "This is my brother," Elena said quickly, stepping toward Cade to ease whatever tension might exist. "Colin, he has been searching for me since I left Crimson Moonpack." Understanding replaced the wariness in Cade's expression, and he extended a hand toward Colin in greeting. Then you are welcome here, without question. Your sister has spoken of you often, and with great affection. Colin, though clearly startled to find himself shaking hands with the king himself, recovered his composure quickly, offering a respectful nod. Thank you, Your Majesty. I did not expect to find her in such circumstances. Come, Cade said, gesturing toward the main hall. You must be exhausted from your travels. Let us get you settled, and then perhaps Elena can explain everything that has happened since she left her former pack. Over the following hours, seated comfortably within the private chamber where Elena had first learned of her connection to Cade, she recounted everything to her brother, watching his expression shift through disbelief, anger at Damon's cruelty, and eventually wonder, as she explained the bond that had formed between herself and the king. Colin listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions, his protective instincts clearly warring with genuine happiness at seeing his sister find something that resembled peace and belonging after everything she had endured. So this is real, Colin said finally, glancing between Elena and Cade with an expression that mixed relief and lingering caution. You are truly his fated mate. As real as anything I have ever known, Cade confirmed, reaching over to take Elena's hand gently in his own. And I intend to honor that bond fully, regardless of the political complications it may cause. There are complications. Colin's brow furrowed with concern. Elena exchanged a glance with Cade before answering. Some among the court believe I am not a suitable match for someone of Cade's position. There has been resistance, though nothing that has changed his commitment to our bond. Colin's jaw tightened, old protective anger flaring visibly. After everything you already survived, they still find reasons to make you feel unworthy. It will not succeed, Cade said firmly. I have made my position clear, and I do not intend to waver, regardless of what pressure my advisors or the surrounding packs might apply. Colin studied Cade for a long moment, something calculating in his gaze despite his youth, clearly assessing the sincerity behind the king's words. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because the tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and he offered a small, grateful nod. Then I am glad she found her way here, even if the circumstances that led to it were unforgivable. Cade arranged for Colin to remain within the stronghold, offering him a position among the trainee guards where his skills, still developing but promising, could be properly nurtured under experienced instruction. Elena watched her brother settle gradually into this new life alongside her, grateful beyond words that fate, or perhaps simple stubborn determination, had reunited them after months of painful separation. But even as joy filled the days that followed, reuniting with Colin, growing closer to Cade, building a life within walls that increasingly felt like home, whispers of trouble continued to stir beneath the surface. Edwin's opposition had not softened, despite Cade's firm dismissals during council meetings, and Elena began noticing subtle signs that resistance to their bond extended beyond mere political discomfort into something more calculated and dangerous. She first sensed it during a formal gathering held to welcome representatives from several neighboring packs, an event meant to reinforce alliances and demonstrate the stability of Cade's rule. Elena had been seated beside him, as had become customary, and though most of the visiting dignitaries treated her with polite, if reserved, courtesy, one figure among the gathered representatives watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with unease. He was an older wolf, silver-haired and sharp-featured, representing a territory Elena did not recognize by name. When their eyes met briefly across the hall, something cold and calculating passed behind his gaze, before he offered a thin, polite smile and looked away. Who is that man? Elena asked Cade quietly, nodding subtly in the stranger's direction. Cade's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Alpha Victor. He rules territory bordering the eastern edge of my kingdom, and he has long harbored ambitions of expanding his influence. Ambitions that a strategic marriage alliance with my throne would have significantly advanced. He wanted you to marry into his pack? His daughter, specifically. It was a match my advisors, Edwin included, had strongly encouraged before you arrived. Cade's jaw tightened further. Victor has not taken well to learning those plans will no longer proceed. Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the crowded hall. Does he pose a genuine threat? I do not yet know, Cade admitted honestly, but I intend to remain watchful. Ambition, combined with wounded pride, can make even reasonable wolves behave in unpredictable ways. The gathering continued without further incident, but Elena found herself unable to fully shake the unease Victor's presence had stirred within her. That night, as she lay awake in her chamber, sleep eluding her despite the exhaustion of the day's events, she found herself wondering, not for the first time, whether the peace she had found within these walls could truly last, or whether it was simply another fragile thing the world intended to eventually take from her. She thought of Colin, safely settled within the training grounds now, finally reunited after months of painful separation. She thought of Cade, whose steady devotion had slowly begun to heal wounds she had once believed permanent. She thought of the life she had begun building here, tentative but genuine, filled with a warmth she had not believed herself capable of feeling again after Damon's cruel rejection. She refused to let fear steal this happiness from her, before it had even been given a fair chance to flourish. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever resistance Victor, Edwin, or anyone else within the kingdom might attempt to raise against her, she resolved to face them with the same stubborn resilience that had carried her through banishment, through injury, through every hardship life had thrown in her path since that terrible night in Crimson Moon Pack. She had survived worse. She would survive this too, whatever form it eventually took. The days following the gathering settled into a deceptive calm, one that Elena found herself distrusting, even as she tried to enjoy the simple pleasures of her new life. She spent mornings continuing her training under Marissa's guidance, her skill with herbs and healing growing steadily, until she could identify and treat minor injuries without needing supervision. Afternoons were often spent with Colin, watching his own progress among the trainee guards with a mixture of pride and lingering worry that came naturally to an older sister who had spent years looking after him. It was during one such afternoon, watching Colin spar with another trainee near the edge of the training grounds, that Marissa approached her with news that would finally answer the lingering questions about the true nature of her bond with Cade. "I have been researching the old texts," Marissa said, settling onto the bench beside Elena, a worn leather-bound book cradled in her hands. The ones concerning concealed bonds, and the magic that sometimes interferes with fate's intended pairings. "I believe I have found something that explains your situation." Elena's attention sharpened immediately, curiosity and lingering anxiety intertwining, as she turned to face the healer fully. "What did you find?" Marissa opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon, the text within, written in an old formal script that Elena struggled to read at a glance. "There is a phenomenon documented here, rare but not unheard of, called a shadow bond. It occurs when a powerful, unresolved connection between two individuals, often tied to significant events or circumstances, temporarily masks the true fated bond between them and someone else entirely." "I do not understand," Elena admitted. "Are you saying my bond with Damon was never real?" "Not exactly." Marissa traced a finger along the aged text. "The shadow bond is real in every sense while it lasts, capable of causing genuine pain when severed, exactly as you experienced. But it exists as a kind of protective barrier, shielding the true bond from being recognized until certain conditions are met, often conditions related to personal growth, significant hardship, or circumstances that prepare both individuals for the connection they are truly meant to share." Elena sat with this information for a long moment, processing the implications slowly. So Damon and I were never meant to be together. The pain I felt when he rejected me, all of it, was simply fate's way of pushing me towards something else. That is one way to understand it, yes. Marissa's expression grew gentle with sympathy. "I know that does not erase the pain you experienced, and I do not mean to diminish how difficult that rejection truly was. But perhaps it offers some comfort, knowing that what happened, however cruel, ultimately led you toward a bond far stronger and more genuine than the one you lost." Elena thought of Cade, of the steady warmth that had grown between them over the past months, of the way his presence had gradually healed wounds she once believed permanent. Whatever pain the past had caused her, she could not deny that it had led her here, to a place and a person that felt more genuinely right than anything she had experienced before. "Does Cade know about this theory?" she asked. "I mentioned it to him briefly, though I wanted to confirm the details in the old texts before speaking with either of you at length." Marissa closed the book carefully. "I believe he would find comfort in the explanation as well, given how deeply this bond has come to mean to him." That evening, Elena shared Marissa's findings with Cade as they walked together through the gardens, the autumn air growing crisper with each passing day. He listened intently, his expression thoughtful as she explained the concept of the shadow bond, the idea that fate had guided her through hardship toward a connection more suited to who she truly was. "It makes a strange kind of sense," Cade said finally, once she had finished. "I have never believed that pain exists without purpose, though I understand that belief can feel hollow when someone is in the midst of suffering. But knowing that everything you endured ultimately led you here, to this bond between us, gives the suffering a meaning it might not have otherwise held." "I still carry the memory of that pain," Elena admitted. "I do not think it will ever fully disappear, even understanding now that it may have served a purpose." "You do not need it to disappear entirely," Cade said, taking her hand gently. "You only need to know that it does not have to define the rest of your life. What we are building together, that can be its own truth, separate from whatever pain came before it." Elena found comfort in his words, though the underlying tension surrounding their bond, the political resistance from advisors like Edwin, the wary ambition she had sensed from Alpha Victor, continued to linger at the edges of her newfound peace. She knew, with growing certainty, that whatever calm they currently enjoyed would not last indefinitely. Kings did not simply choose their mates without consequence, especially when that choice defied the careful political calculations others had spent considerable effort arranging. That certainty proved correct sooner than she expected. Roughly a week after her conversation with Marissa, Cade called an unusual council meeting, one that included not only his usual advisors, but also several representatives from allied pacts, who had traveled specifically for the occasion. Elena was invited to attend, though the formal nature of the gathering, combined with the unusually large number of attendees, filled her with an unease she could not quite shake as she took her seat beside Cade, at the head of the long meeting table. Edwin opened the proceedings with careful, deliberate formality, his gaze occasionally flickering toward Elena with an expression that revealed little beyond practiced neutrality. "Your Majesty, the matter before this council today concerns the growing concern among several allied territories regarding the nature of your intended succession and the political stability of your reign moving forward." "Speak plainly, Edwin," Cade said, his tone carrying the faint edge of impatience Elena had come to recognize whenever political maneuvering tested his considerable patience. "Several pacts, including that of Alpha Victor, have expressed formal concern that a mate without established title, pack alliance, or political standing may weaken perceived stability among the territories that answer to your throne. There are whispers, Your Majesty, of potential challenges to your authority should this bond proceed toward formal recognition as Luna." The words landed heavily across the chamber, and Elena felt the weight of every gaze shift toward her once again, the same calculating assessment she had grown wearily familiar with since her arrival within these walls. She kept her expression carefully composed, refusing to let the old insecurities rise to the surface despite how deeply the implied threat unsettled her. "Challenges from whom, specifically?" Cade's voice remained level, though Elena could sense the controlled fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Alpha Victor has indicated he may consider withdrawing his territory's allegiance should this matter proceed without proper consideration of the political consequences," Edwin continued carefully. "Other allied pacts have expressed similar, though less direct concerns. There is even discussion, Your Majesty, of a formal challenge to your leadership should the council determine your judgment has been compromised by personal attachment rather than strategic necessity." A tense silence fell across the chamber, broken only when Cade rose slowly from his seat, his presence commanding immediate attention as he surveyed the gathered representatives with an intensity that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "Let me be entirely clear," Cade said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that filled the room without needing to rise in volume. "I did not inherit this throne through political convenience, and I will not maintain it through the same. My father taught me that a ruler's strength comes from integrity, not from carefully calculated alliances built on nothing more than strategic advantage. If Alpha Victor or any other territory believes my judgment compromised because I have chosen genuine connection over political convenience, then I welcome whatever challenge they wish to bring forward." Murmurs rippled through the gathered representatives, some clearly unsettled by the directness of Cade's response. others exchanging glances that suggested quiet approval of his unwavering stance. Elena watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and lingering fear, grateful beyond measure for Cade's steadfast defense of their bond, but painfully aware that his declaration had just transformed a quiet political concern into an open challenge that could not easily be walked back. The meeting concluded shortly after, though the tension it had stirred lingered long after the representatives departed, whispers of division and potential conflict spreading through the stronghold in the days that followed. Elena understood, with growing clarity, that the peaceful existence she had begun to build within these walls was about to be tested far more severely than she had initially anticipated. Whatever storm was gathering on the horizon, she knew it would not simply pass by harmlessly. It would demand to be faced directly, and soon. In the weeks that followed the tense council meeting, the stronghold seemed to hold its breath, an uneasy quiet settling over the halls that had once felt so warm and welcoming to Elena. Servants spoke in hushed tones when she passed. Guards seemed more watchful than usual, and even Marissa's usually cheerful demeanor carried a subtle undercurrent of worry whenever the topic of the growing political tension arose. Elena tried to focus on the parts of her life that still brought her genuine joy, her continued training with Marissa, her afternoons spent watching Colin grow more confident and skilled among the trainee guards, her quiet evenings with Cade that remained, despite everything else happening around them, a source of steady comfort. But the looming threat of Alpha Victor's ambitions, combined with Edwin's continued political maneuvering, made it impossible to fully relax into the peace she had only recently begun to trust. It was Colin who first brought concerning news to her attention, having overheard fragments of conversation among the guards during his training that suggested the situation was escalating faster than the formal council meetings had indicated. "There is talk of Victor gathering support from other territories," Colin told her one afternoon, his expression grave as they sat together near the training grounds, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. Not open rebellion, not yet, but enough quiet alliance building that some of the guards seemed genuinely worried about what might happen if this continues. "Cade has not mentioned anything so serious," Elena said, though unease coiled tighter in her stomach at her brother's words. "Perhaps he does not wish to worry you further than necessary." Colin's expression softened with concern. "But Elena, I think you should be prepared for the possibility that this may not resolve peacefully. Ambition and wounded pride can push wolves toward decisions they might not otherwise consider." Elena absorbed this warning with a growing sense of dread, though she refused to let it paralyze her entirely. She had faced hardship before, had survived rejection and banishment, and the desperate uncertainty of wandering alone through unfamiliar territory. Whatever challenges lay ahead now, she resolved to face them with the same resilience that had carried her this far, rather than retreating into fear. That evening, she raised the topic directly with Cade, unwilling to let unspoken worry fester silently between them any longer. They sat together in his private study, a fire crackling warmly in the hearth despite the growing chill of late autumn, and Elena watched his expression carefully as she repeated what Colin had shared with her. Cade's jaw tightened, confirming that her brother's concerns held merit, rather than simply being exaggerated rumor. "Victor has indeed been reaching out to several territories, testing their willingness to support a formal challenge against my leadership. Nothing has been declared openly yet, but the groundwork is clearly being laid." "Why did you not tell me?" Elena asked, though she understood the protective instinct behind his silence, even as it frustrated her. "I did not wish to burden you with uncertainty before I had a clearer picture of the actual threat we face." Cade reached over, taking her hand gently in his. "But you deserve honesty, especially given how directly this concerns you. I am sorry for withholding it. What happens if Victor gathers enough support for a formal challenge?" Cade's expression grew serious, weighing his words carefully before responding. "Among our laws, a formal challenge to leadership can take several forms, ranging from a vote of no confidence among allied territories to, in more extreme circumstances, direct combat between challenger and current ruler, to determine who holds legitimate claim to authority." Elena's blood ran cold at the implication. "Combat? You mean Victor could challenge you directly, wolf against wolf?" "It is an old tradition, rarely invoked in recent generations, but still recognized within our laws." Cade's grip on her hand tightened slightly, as though sensing her rising fear. "I do not believe Victor would resort to something so drastic without exhausting political avenues first. but I would be foolish not to consider every possibility. And if he does challenge you directly? Then I will face him, Cade said simply, though the weight of what that statement truly meant hung heavy in the air between them. I have trained for such possibilities since childhood. I do not intend to lose my throne, or you, to Victor's ambition. Elena wanted desperately to believe the confidence in his words, but fear gnawed persistently at the edges of her thoughts. She had already lost so much once before, had already experienced the devastating pain of having something precious torn away without warning. The thought of losing Cade, of watching their fragile, hard-won happiness crumble beneath the weight of political ambition and wounded pride, terrified her more deeply than she wanted to admit. I do not want you risking yourself because of me, she said quietly. If stepping back, if ending our bond publicly, would ease this tension and protect your throne, perhaps that is what needs to happen. Cade's expression shifted immediately, something fierce and unyielding replacing the careful patience he usually maintained. He rose from his seat, kneeling before her chair so their eyes met at level, his hands gently but firmly cupping her face. Do not speak such words to me again, Elena. I did not choose this bond carelessly, and I will not abandon it out of fear or political convenience. You are not a burden to be discarded when circumstances become difficult. You are the truest thing I have found in years of ruling this kingdom, and I will fight for that, whatever form the fight eventually takes. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, overwhelmed by the fierce conviction in his words, by the memory of how differently Damon had once treated a bond that should have carried the same significance. I am frightened, she admitted softly. Frightened of losing this, of losing you, after finally believing something good might last. I understand that fear, Cade said gently, brushing a tear from her cheek with careful tenderness. But I promise you this, whatever challenges Victor or anyone else brings against us, I will face them fully, and I will not let fear or political pressure convince me to release something as precious as what we have built together. They remained together long into the evening, finding comfort in each other's presence, despite the uncertainty looming over their future. Elena found herself, despite everything, grateful for the clarity Cade's honesty had provided, however frightening the implications. She would rather face the truth of their situation directly than continue existing in the uneasy silence of unspoken worry. Over the following days, the political tension within the kingdom continued to build steadily, though no formal challenge had yet been declared. Elena noticed increased security around the stronghold, additional guards stationed at key points throughout the grounds, and a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere that suggested Cade's advisors were preparing for the possibility of open conflict, despite hoping it could still be avoided through diplomatic means. Colin, meanwhile, had thrown himself even more intensely into his training, driven by a fierce determination to protect his sister should the growing tension eventually erupt into genuine danger. Elena watched him train with a mixture of pride and worry, grateful for his loyalty, but concerned about the weight of responsibility he seemed determined to carry, despite his youth. It was during one such training session, watching Colin spar against one of the more experienced guards, that Marissa approached her with an expression that immediately signaled something significant had occurred. Elena, the healer said quietly, drawing her aside from the training grounds, I think you should know that Alpha Victor has formally requested an audience with the king. He arrives within the week, accompanied by several allied representatives. Elena's stomach tightened with apprehension. For what purpose? The messenger did not specify directly, though given everything that has transpired, I suspect this visit will determine whether this conflict resolves through diplomacy, or escalates towards something far more dangerous. Marissa's expression carried genuine concern. Cade will need to be at his strongest during this audience. I imagine he will need your support as well, whatever form that support might take. Elena nodded slowly, steeling herself for whatever confrontation the coming week would bring. She thought of everything she had already survived, the rejection, the banishment, the desperate journey through unfamiliar territory that had ultimately led her here. She had faced impossible odds before, and found the strength to continue forward. Whatever Victor intended to bring against Cade's throne, against their bond, she resolved to face it with the same unwavering resilience, refusing to let fear dictate the outcome, before the confrontation had even truly begun. Alpha Victor arrived exactly 1 week later, his procession moving through the stronghold gates, with a deliberate show of confidence that immediately set Elena's nerves on edge. She watched from a window overlooking the courtyard as he dismounted, flanked by a dozen warriors from his own territory, his silver hair catching the pale autumn light as he surveyed the grounds with the same calculating expression she remembered from their brief encounter weeks before. What struck her most, however, was not Victor himself, but the figure who dismounted beside him, someone Elena recognized instantly despite the months that had passed since she had last seen him. Damon. Her breath caught in her throat, old wounds resurfacing with unexpected sharpness at the unexpected sight of him standing within the very stronghold she had come to consider home. He looked much the same as she remembered, though something in his posture seemed less certain than the confident, dismissive figure who had rejected her so publicly all those months ago. "Why is he here?" Elena asked Cade, who had come to stand beside her at the window, his own expression tightening with barely contained tension as he registered Damon's presence. "I do not know," Cade admitted, "but I intend to find out." They descended together to the main hall, where Victor and his delegation had already been shown to await formal audience. Elena forced herself to walk beside Cade with her chin held level, refusing to let old fear or humiliation show on her face, despite the way her heart pounded against her ribs at the prospect of facing Damon again, especially in such politically charged circumstances. Victor bowed with practiced formality as they entered, though the gesture carried an undercurrent of calculation rather than genuine respect. "Your Majesty, thank you for granting this audience." "You requested it urgently enough that refusal seemed unwise," Cade replied evenly, his tone carrying no warmth, despite the diplomatic courtesy of his words. "I trust you have brought something more substantial than the vague concerns your representatives voiced during our council meeting." "Indeed." Victor's gaze flickered briefly toward Elena before returning to Cade. "I believe introductions are unnecessary, given that this young man's history with your intended Luna is already well documented among the packs." Damon stepped forward slightly, and Elena felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her once again, the familiar weight of public scrutiny settling heavily across her shoulders. She met Damon's gaze directly, refusing to look away despite the discomfort twisting through her chest. "I have come," Damon said, his voice carrying less confidence than she remembered, "to correct a grave error." "An error?" Cade's voice carried a dangerous edge now, his protective instincts clearly straining against diplomatic restraint. "My rejection of Elena was a mistake," Damon continued, and Elena felt genuine shock ripple through her at his words. "I acted rashly, influenced by pressures I should not have allowed to dictate such an important decision. I have come to formally request reconsideration of our bond." Silence fell across the chamber, thick and heavy, as the implications of Damon's words settled over everyone present. Elena's mind raced, disbelief warring with old, familiar pain, as she processed what he was suggesting. After everything, after the humiliation and banishment and months of hardship his rejection had caused her, he now believed he could simply appear and request reconsideration, as though nothing significant had occurred in between. "You cannot be serious," Elena said, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. "You rejected me in front of my entire pack. You allowed the council to banish me. I nearly died wandering through unfamiliar territory because of the choice you made." "I understand the harm I caused," Damon said, though his tone lacked the depth of genuine remorse Elena might have expected from someone truly seeking forgiveness. "But bonds can be complicated, and reconsidering a rejection, while rare, is not without precedent among our laws." Victor stepped forward then, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning had finally reached its intended culmination. "Your Majesty, surely you can appreciate the elegant solution this presents. Should Elena choose to return to her original bond, the political concerns raised by allied territories would resolve naturally, without need for further conflict or challenge to your leadership." Understanding crashed over Elena with sudden sickening clarity. This was never about genuine remorse or reconsideration. This was Victor's calculated attempt to remove her from Cade's life entirely, using Damon as a convenient tool to accomplish through manipulation what direct challenge might not achieve as cleanly. "This is not your decision to make, Victor," Cade said, his voice low and dangerous, though he maintained careful control despite the fury Elena could sense radiating from him. "Nor is it yours, Damon, regardless of whatever precedent you believe exists." A rejected bond does not simply reset because circumstances have become politically inconvenient for those who orchestrated its severing in the first place. With respect, Your Majesty, Victor said, his composure unwavering despite Cade's obvious anger. The laws governing mate bonds exist precisely to provide clarity in complicated situations such as this. Perhaps it would be wise to allow Elena herself to decide, rather than assuming her preference without consultation. All eyes turned toward Elena once again, and she felt the weight of the moment settle heavily across her shoulders, understanding that whatever she said next would carry consequences far beyond her own personal feelings. She looked at Damon, searching his expression for any genuine trace of the remorse he claimed to feel, and found instead only calculated uncertainty, a man clearly following instructions rather than acting from authentic conviction. Then she looked at Cade, at the steady, unwavering devotion that had characterized every moment of their bond since the night she had collapsed at his borders, injured and broken, expecting nothing but finding instead genuine care that had never once wavered, despite mounting political pressure. "You want my decision," Elena said, her voice growing steadier with each word, as conviction replaced her earlier uncertainty. "Very well, Damon. You rejected me, not because circumstances forced your hand, but because you believed me unworthy of standing beside you. You watched as your council banished me from the only home I had ever known, and you said nothing in my defense. Whatever regret you claim to feel now arrives conveniently timed with Alpha Victor's political ambitions, and I do not believe for a moment that your remorse is genuine rather than strategic." Damon's expression flickered, something like shame briefly crossing his features before he composed himself again, though he offered no argument against her accusation. "I choose Cade," Elena continued, turning to face the king directly, her voice carrying absolute certainty now. "Not because circumstances or politics demand it, but because he has shown me, every single day since I arrived here, broken and expecting nothing, what it truly means to be valued. I will not abandon that for the sake of easing anyone's political calculations." Cade's expression softened with fierce pride and relief, though he maintained his composed authority as he turned back toward Victor and Damon. "You have your answer. I would suggest you accept it gracefully, rather than continuing to pursue a path that will only end in further conflict." Victor's calculating expression hardened, the diplomatic mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine frustration beneath. "This decision may prove costly, Your Majesty. Several territories stand ready to formally withdraw their allegiance, should this matter not resolve favorably." "Then let them withdraw," Cade said, his voice carrying absolute finality. "I would rather rule a smaller, honest kingdom than maintain a larger one, built on alliances that demand I sacrifice genuine bonds for the sake of political convenience." The tension in the chamber stretched taut, everyone present recognizing the significance of the standoff unfolding before them. Victor studied Cade for a long moment, clearly recalculating his approach now that his manipulation had failed to achieve its intended result. "Very well," Victor said finally, his voice carrying barely restrained anger beneath forced composure. "If diplomacy has failed to resolve this matter satisfactorily, then perhaps a more direct approach is warranted. I formally invoke the ancient right of challenge, Your Majesty. Should you refuse to reconsider your position regarding succession and alliance, I will contest your leadership directly." Gasps rippled through the gathered witnesses, the formal invocation of such an old, rarely used tradition, carrying weight that settled heavily over the entire chamber. Elena felt her heart drop, fear coiling tight in her chest at the realization that the conflict she had hoped might resolve through words alone had just escalated into something far more dangerous. Cade, however, showed no trace of hesitation, his expression settling into calm, unwavering resolve. "I accept your challenge, Victor. Prepare yourself accordingly, for I will not yield my throne, nor the bond I have chosen, to ambition disguised as political necessity." The chamber erupted into hushed, urgent conversation as Victor and his delegation departed, the formal challenge now set in motion, the date and terms to be determined according to ancient tradition. Elena stood frozen amid the chaos, fear and fierce determination warring within her chest, as she processed the reality of what was about to unfold. Whatever peace she had begun to build within these walls now hung suspended, dependent entirely on the outcome of a confrontation that would determine not only Cade's throne, but the very future of the bond they had fought so hard to protect. The days leading up to the formal challenge passed in a blur of tense preparation, the entire stronghold seeming to hold its collective breath as the appointed date drew steadily closer. Elena found herself unable to focus on her usual routines, her mind constantly circling back to worry, despite her best efforts to project calm confidence for Cade's sake. Cade, for his part, approached the coming challenge with the same steady determination he brought to every aspect of his rule, spending long hours in the training grounds refining his skills alongside his most trusted guards, reviewing the formal terms of the ancient tradition with his advisors, and ensuring every possible preparation had been made, despite the uncertainty of what exactly Victor might attempt during the confrontation. "You do not need to worry so intensely," Cade told her one evening, finding her sitting quietly in the private garden where they had first acknowledged the depth of their bond, moonlight casting soft shadows across her troubled expression. "I have trained for challenges such as this since childhood. Victor is ambitious, but ambition alone does not guarantee skill in direct combat." "I cannot help but worry," Elena admitted, reaching for his hand as he settled beside her on the stone bench. "You are risking everything, your throne, your safety, because of the bond between us. If something happens to you, nothing will happen that I cannot overcome," Cade said firmly, though his tone carried gentle reassurance rather than dismissiveness. "But even if it did, know this: I would not change my decision, regardless of the outcome. What we share is worth defending, whatever the cost." Elena rested her head against his shoulder, drawing what comfort she could from his steady presence, though the underlying fear refused to fully dissipate. She thought of everything they had built together since her arrival, months earlier, broken and expecting nothing from the world beyond simple survival. She could not bear the thought of losing him now, not after finally believing that lasting happiness might genuinely be possible. Colin, too, had thrown himself intensely into preparation, insisting on being present during the formal challenge despite Elena's initial reluctance to expose him to potential danger. "I am not a child any longer, Elena," he told her firmly when she raised her concerns. "I have trained hard these past months, and I will not simply stand aside while something this significant unfolds. Cade has become important to both of us. I intend to support him, and you, however I am able." The morning of the formal challenge arrived with a crisp clarity that seemed almost cruel in its beauty, autumn sunlight filtering through clear skies, as representatives from allied territories gathered within the designated combat circle at the edge of the training grounds. Elena stood among the assembled witnesses, Colin steady beside her, Marissa close at hand, should medical attention become necessary, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce hope as she watched Cade approach the circle's edge. Victor arrived shortly after, his expression carrying the same calculated confidence he had displayed during their earlier confrontation, though Elena noticed a subtle tension in his posture that suggested even he understood the significant risk this challenge carried for his own ambitions. Damon stood among Victor's delegation, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena caught him glancing toward her more than once, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. The formal terms, as explained by a neutral elder chosen to oversee the proceedings, were straightforward, despite the weight of their implications. Both combatants would fight in wolf form, following ancient traditions meant to test not brute strength alone, but skill, strategy, and the discipline earned through genuine dedication to one's training. The challenge would conclude when one combatant yielded or proved unable to continue, with the victor's claim to leadership and authority recognized as final by all territories present. Elena watched, heart in her throat, as Cade and Victor moved to opposite sides of the circle, their human forms beginning to shift into the powerful wolves beneath, fur rippling into existence, as bones and muscles reshaped themselves according to ancient instinct. Cade's wolf form was impressive, dark-furred and powerfully built, moving with a controlled grace that spoke of years of disciplined training. Victor's wolf, though older, carried its own formidable presence, silver fur catching the morning light as he circled the edge of the combat space with predatory calculation. The elder gave the signal, and the challenge began. Elena forced herself to watch despite the fear twisting through her stomach, understanding that looking away would not change the outcome, only leave her more anxious not knowing what unfolded before her. The two wolves circled each other cautiously at first, testing reactions, searching for openings, neither willing to commit fully until they understood their opponent's approach. Victor struck first, a swift, calculated lunge that Cade avoided with practiced ease, using the momentum of his dodge to circle behind his opponent and force Victor to reposition defensively. The exchange continued in this manner for several tense minutes, both combatants testing and probing, neither gaining decisive advantage. The crowd of witnesses watching in tense silence, broken only by the occasional gasp when a strike landed close enough to cause concern. Elena noticed, as the confrontation continued, that Cade's training showed clearly in his measured, strategic approach, conserving his energy, while Victor, driven perhaps by wounded pride and desperate ambition, began pressing more aggressively, his attacks growing increasingly forceful, but also increasingly predictable, as frustration began eroding his earlier calculated patience. The turning point came when Victor, overextending in a particularly aggressive lunge, left himself briefly vulnerable, and Cade capitalized immediately, using the opening to gain decisive positional advantage. Within moments, the exchange concluded, Cade's superior control and discipline overwhelming Victor's more desperate, aggressive approach, until the older wolf found himself unable to continue, yielding formally according to the ancient tradition that governed such challenges. A wave of relief swept through Elena so intense she nearly collapsed where she stood, Colin's steady hand catching her arm to help her remain upright, as the crowd around them erupted into a mixture of tense murmurs, and, from those loyal to Cade, quiet expressions of relief and approval. Both wolves shifted back to their human forms, breathing heavily, but largely unharmed beyond minor scrapes and bruises that Marissa moved quickly to address. The challenge is concluded, the neutral elder announced formally, his voice carrying across the assembled witnesses. King Cade Ashriver retains his throne and authority, recognized and confirmed according to ancient tradition, binding upon all territories present. Victor, breathing heavily and clearly humbled by the outcome, offered a formal, if strained, acknowledgement of defeat. The challenge is yours, Your Majesty. I accept the outcome according to tradition. See that you do, Cade replied, his own breathing still elevated from the exertion, though his voice carried steady authority, despite the physical toll of the confrontation. I hold no desire for continued conflict between our territories, provided this matter is now considered fully resolved. Victor nodded stiffly, gathering his delegation, and departing the training grounds with considerably less confidence than he had arrived with weeks before. Damon lingered briefly, his gaze finding Elena's across the dispersing crowd, something like genuine regret finally visible in his expression. I hope you find lasting happiness, Elena, he said quietly, close enough that only she could hear the words. You deserved better than what I gave you, both then and in my attempt to reclaim something I had no right to reclaim. Elena studied him for a long moment, old anger finally beginning to soften into something closer to distant, uncomplicated release. I have found it, she said simply. I hope you find your own path forward as well, Damon. He nodded once, then turned to follow Victor's departing delegation, leaving Elena standing amid the settling chaos of the training grounds, relief and lingering adrenaline coursing through her as she turned toward Cade, who was making his way toward her despite the healers attempting to properly tend his minor injuries. You are safe, she breathed, closing the remaining distance between them and wrapping her arms around him, despite his obvious exhaustion. I told you nothing would keep me from you, Cade murmured against her hair, his arms wrapping around her with fierce, grateful relief. The throne is secure, the challenge resolved, and our bond remains exactly as it should be, unbroken and unchallenged by anyone who might have hoped otherwise. Around them, the gathered witnesses began to disperse, murmurs of the outcome already spreading throughout the stronghold, and, soon enough, throughout the surrounding territories. Elena understood, standing there in Cade's arms beneath the clear autumn sky, that whatever challenges might still arise in the future, they had weathered this storm together, emerging not simply unbroken, but stronger, their bond tested and proven genuine, before the eyes of an entire kingdom. Winter arrived gently that year, the first snow dusting the gardens of the royal stronghold in soft, quiet layers that transformed the familiar grounds into something new and peaceful. Elena stood at the window of her chamber, watching the snowfall settle over branches that had been golden with autumn leaves only weeks before, and felt a sense of calm she had not believed herself capable of experiencing again, after everything that had unfolded since that terrible night in Crimson Moon Pack. The weeks following Victor's defeat had brought significant change throughout the kingdom. Word of the formal challenge and its outcome had spread quickly among the allied territories, and rather than the fracturing Victor had hoped to provoke, most packs found themselves impressed by Cade's steadfast defense of his chosen bond, several representatives even reaching out afterward to formally reaffirm their allegiance, citing renewed confidence in a ruler who valued genuine integrity over calculated political convenience. Edwin, too, had softened considerably in his opposition, though it had taken time and several honest conversations before his wariness fully transformed into genuine support. Elena had made a point of engaging with him directly, rather than avoiding the tension between them, patiently demonstrating through consistent action that her presence within the kingdom brought value beyond simple political calculation. "I underestimated you," Edwin had admitted to her during one such conversation, weeks after the challenge concluded. "I focused too narrowly on titles and alliances, forgetting that a kingdom's true strength often comes from the character of those who lead it, rather than simply the political connections they represent." "I understand your caution," Elena had replied honestly. "You were trying to protect something you care about deeply. I cannot fault you for that, even when it made things difficult for me personally." Their relationship, while perhaps never destined for genuine warmth, settled into a mutual respect that Elena found she could work with comfortably, understanding that not every relationship needed to be defined by closeness to hold value. Colin, meanwhile, had continued flourishing among the trainee guards, his dedication and natural skill earning him increasing recognition among his instructors. Elena watched her brother grow more confident with each passing week, grateful beyond measure that he had found not only reunion with her, but a genuine place of belonging within this new life they had both built together. It was on a crisp winter morning, several months after Victor's formal challenge, that Cade requested Elena join him in the throne room, an unusual request, given that most of their significant conversations occurred in more private settings. She arrived to find not the empty formal chamber she expected, but a space filled with familiar faces, Marissa, Colin, Edwin, and dozens of others who had become part of her life since her arrival within these walls. Cade stood near the throne itself, dressed in formal attire that Elena had rarely seen him wear, his expression carrying a mixture of solemnity and barely contained emotion as she approached, confusion evident on her face at the unexpected gathering. "What is happening?" she asked quietly as she reached him. "Something I should have arranged sooner," Cade said, taking her hands gently in his. "But circumstances required patience, ensuring that when this moment arrived, it would be met with the full support and recognition it deserves, free from the shadow of political challenge or lingering doubt." He turned to address the gathered witnesses, his voice carrying the same commanding authority Elena had grown to know so well, though softened now with genuine emotion. "Many of you witnessed the trials this bond endured, the challenges we faced together, and the strength with which Elena met every obstacle placed before her. Today, I wish to formally recognize what has already been true in my heart, since the moment I first felt this connection. Elena, will you accept the title of Luna, standing beside me not simply as my fated mate, but as an equal partner in leading this kingdom forward?" Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment, by the memory of everything that had led her here, from the devastating humiliation of Damon's rejection, to the desperate uncertainty of her journey through unfamiliar territory, to finally finding a place where she was not simply tolerated, but genuinely valued and celebrated. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion but carrying absolute certainty. "I accept, with all my heart." The gathered witnesses erupted into warm applause, and Cade drew her into a gentle embrace, before formally presenting her to those assembled as the kingdom's new Luna, a title that carried far more than ceremonial significance, representing genuine partnership and shared authority over decisions that would shape the future of the territories under their care. The formal coronation ceremony followed weeks later, larger and more elaborate than the private gathering that had first confirmed Elena's acceptance, attended by representatives from every allied territory, including, somewhat unexpectedly, a formal delegation from Crimson Moon Pack itself. Elena had not anticipated their attendance, and when Corinne approached her following the ceremony, expression carefully neutral, she felt old wounds stir uncomfortably beneath the surface of her carefully maintained composure. "You have found remarkable success," Corinne said, her tone carrying something that might have been genuine respect, though old habits of formal distance remained evident in her measured words. The council recognizes the strength you have shown, and wishes to extend, belatedly, our regret for how your departure from our pack was handled. Elena studied the elder for a long moment, weighing the sincerity of the apology against the memory of standing in that torchlit clearing, humiliated and cast aside, without genuine consideration for the harm being done to her. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," she said finally, choosing grace over lingering bitterness. "I hold no desire for conflict between our territories. What happened shaped my path toward where I stand today, and I find I cannot entirely regret a journey that led me here." Corinne nodded, something like genuine relief passing across her expression, and the formal exchange concluded with cautious but sincere goodwill between the two territories, old wounds beginning their slow process of healing, even if complete resolution would require considerably more time. As the celebrations continued into the evening, Elena found herself standing beside Cade, near the edge of the gathered crowd, watching Colin laugh freely among a group of fellow trainees, who had become genuine friends over the preceding months, watching Marissa deep in animated conversation with several other healers, watching the warm, genuine celebration unfolding around her, with a sense of profound gratitude that still occasionally caught her by surprise. "Do you remember?" Cade said quietly, his hand finding hers as they watched the festivities. "The night my guards first brought you to me, injured and barely conscious, carrying nothing but the clothes on your back and whatever strength remained after everything you had already endured." "I remember," Elena said softly, memory carrying her back to that desperate, painful moment that had felt, at the time, like the absolute bottom of everything she had ever known. "I could not have imagined then," Cade continued, "that the broken, exhausted woman my guards carried through those gates would become the strongest, most genuine partner I could have ever hoped to find. Every challenge we faced together, every difficulty this bond required us to overcome, only proved further what I recognized from that very first moment, that you possessed a resilience and depth of character worth defending against any obstacle the world might place before us." Elena leaned against him, watching the snow continue its gentle descent beyond the warm glow of the celebration surrounding them, thinking of everything that had led her to this moment. The rejection that had once felt like the ending of everything meaningful in her life had instead become the beginning of a journey she could never have anticipated, one that had carried her through devastating pain toward a life filled with genuine belonging, fierce love, and a partnership built on authentic respect rather than convenient obligation. "I was broken when I arrived here," she said quietly, "but you never once treated me as though that brokenness defined my worth. You saw something worth choosing, worth defending, even when choosing me meant risking everything you had built." "You were never truly broken," Cade said, turning to face her fully, his expression carrying the same fierce conviction she had come to know so well. "You were simply waiting for someone willing to see your true strength, rather than judging you by the cruelty others had shown you. I am endlessly grateful that fate led you to my borders that night, however painful the circumstances that brought you there." Elena smiled, genuine and unguarded, feeling the last lingering shadows of old pain finally settle into something manageable, something that no longer defined her present or threatened her future. She thought of Colin, safe and thriving beside her. She thought of Marissa, whose friendship had helped guide her toward understanding the true nature of her bond with Cade. She thought of the kingdom stretching beyond these walls, territories she now shared responsibility for protecting and guiding alongside the man who had chosen her, fully and without hesitation, over every political convenience that might have offered an easier path. She had arrived at these gates rejected, banished and broken, expecting nothing from a world that had already shown her considerable cruelty. She stood here now, months later, as Luna of a kingdom that had chosen to embrace her fully, standing beside a king who had selected her, without reservation, over every alternative his advisors and political circumstances had offered. The snow continued falling gently around them, and Elena understood, with a certainty that settled deep and unshakable within her heart, that whatever challenges the future might still bring, she would face them from a place of genuine strength and belonging. No longer the broken woman who had collapsed at these borders, but someone who had discovered, through hardship and eventual triumph, exactly how much she had always been worth.